Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of our Malicious Compliance. In today's episode, smiling all the way home. But I didn't retire. Stop wasting time and follow the job order. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Smiling all the way home. At one point in my career I worked for a major telecom. We did tech support for their VoIP product. Their documentation was lacking and I worked in their escalation team. To make things easier for me, I built my own website with screenshots of the interface for their device along with common routers to explain what to do for analysts that called me. Mostly just to make life easier for me, but it was significantly better than their documentation, so many people used it to do their job. The company has a term-to-perm contract with the union that said if anyone was still employed after 3 years, the company had to make a permanent position available for them. I was nearing on my 3 years but was already planning to quit to go to college. One day I came in and was immediately called in to meet with the managers. They pulled the corporate playbook combo move. 1. We did a random audit and found you used your computer for personal use. We are giving you a letter of warning for that. Sign here. 2. We're giving you a personal review right now. If you have a letter of warning, the highest rating we can issue is needs improvement, so we're giving you that rating. Sign here. 3. Your contract states if your needs improvement at any time you can be job completed. This isn't a termination, we are simply calling your contract complete early. Security will walk you out. So after they walked me out, I listened to happy music the whole drive home. Why, you ask? Enter malicious compliance. The documentation I created was on my own website, was not sanctioned by work, and as it was on my own website it had proprietary information that I shouldn't have. But also their traffic didn't benefit me as I was no longer employed. So naturally I took the whole website down. From the start, I had configured the whole site to force refreshes anytime the pages loaded so they couldn't use cached data. I got calls from my coworkers that night that suddenly the entire department had no idea how to do their job. But I didn't retire. The following is a post I made on r/ProRevenge. Several commenters said I should post it here as well. I suppose it's actually a reverse case of malicious compliance since it's a troublesome employee who gets their well-deserved comeuppance when her boss decides to go strictly by the book. So here it is copied and pasted below. My friend, I'll call her Sandy, worked at a travel agency in British Columbia, Canada. It was a small, owner-operated business with the owner and 3 employees including my friend. Everyone worked Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of my friend's co-workers, I'll call her Jane, an older woman in her early to mid-60s, was a long-time nuisance employee. Among other sketchy behavior, Jane was always scamming ways to take time off over and above her official paid vacation time. In order to make up for the lost hours, she would claim overtime hours/pay by supposedly going into the office in her off hours to finish up work without being requested by the owner to do so. Despite being caught in her own lies on a number of occasions and being warned about trying to claim for unsanctioned overtime, the owner of the travel agency was reluctant to officially reprimand Jane or get rid of her. The reason being is the owner discovered after she had hired Jane that Jane had actually been fired from her previous job at another local travel agency for pulling the same stunts. However, Jane had sued her former employer for unfair dismissal and had won a settlement. After a few years of my friend Sandy working at the travel agency, the owner was ready to retire and offered to sell the business to my friend. Sandy took her up on the deal and took over the business while keeping on Jane and the other employee. Once again, just as the previous owner was afraid to get rid of Jane, so was Sandy for fear of being sued. When Sandy took over the business, she instituted guidelines regarding taking time off and she established an official, no overtime, policy. Jane would still try with her shenanigans but was far less successful in getting what she wanted with my friend in charge. However, Jane still had one trick up her sleeve when she wanted to take time off on a whim. Sandy was a divorced single mom of 2 boys who were heavily involved in youth hockey. She would sometimes leave the office an hour or 2 before closing to get her boys to hockey practice or a game. In order to avoid requesting in person and potentially being denied, Jane would wait for Sandy to be out of the office to book a day off if she didn't feel like coming into work or had made plans. Sandy would then arrive at work the next morning only to discover that Jane wasn't coming in. Despite this happening a number of times, Sandy would usually let it slide since there was now a definite, no overtime, policy. Therefore, Jane could no longer claim to come into work on the weekend or after hours in order to try and make up for the day off. She would either miss out on a day's pay, in turn saving Sandy money as the owner, or it would come out of her remaining paid vacation days. Moreover, 2 people in the office at one time could usually handle everything. Jane not coming in was really a no-loss situation for Sandy. There was one time, however, when Sandy was going to be away for 1 or 2 work days just before the weekend to take her boys to a hockey tournament. She told both Jane and the other employee both verbally and in writing that they could not book time off for the dates in question since she would be away and needed both of them in the office. Within a few days of giving this notice, Sandy went into the office on a Saturday to do some paperwork and go through the sales for the week. This is when she discovered that, only the day before, Jane had booked a trip for her daughter and son-in-law to Las Vegas as well as a plane ticket in her name to Calgary where her daughter lived. Both the trip to Vegas and the ticket to Calgary coincided with the date Sandy would be out of the office. Sandy then checked the vacation booking schedule to further discover that Jane had indeed booked the days off that she had expressly been told she couldn't have. Not mentioning she had discovered the travel Jane had booked for herself and her daughter, Sandy emailed Jane telling her she would have to deny her the days off since she had already been told they were unavailable because she, Sandy, would be away and needed Jane in the office. Through a continued series of email exchanges, Jane replied and outright lied to Sandy with some excuse about her daughter getting some long-awaited medical treatment or surgery, and she needed to go to Calgary to help out for a few days and look after her granddaughter. Sandy replied to this lie by telling Jane she knew about the trip she had booked to Vegas for her daughter and son-in-law, that Jane's trip to Calgary was most likely to babysit her granddaughter while her daughter was in Vegas, and that she would still have to deny Jane the days off especially since she booked them after being told they were unavailable. Jane countered in her subsequent reply, without even addressing the fact that she had been caught in a lie, that she had been a dedicated employee of the travel agency for several years and couldn't understand why she was being treated so unfairly after all she had done for the business. She then wrote that since she wasn't being treated as a valued employee, she had no choice but to retire and was giving her 2 weeks' notice. Despite Jane's threat, Sandy replied that she would still be unable to grant her the days off and left it at that without making any mention of Jane's threat to quit/retire. Sandy then contacted her accountant, who also acted as her de facto business advisor, and explained what had happened with Jane. Also aware of Jane's previous shenanigans, Sandy's accountant told her that this was the out she had been looking for with Jane, and she had it all in writing. He told her that Jane had essentially resigned/retired and all Sandy needed to do was honor Jane's desire to do so, let her finish out her 2 weeks, or pay her 2 weeks' wages in lieu with no further severance pay legally required since she hadn't been fired. The following Monday, Sandy went into the office early accompanied by her long-term boyfriend to act as a witness. She put Jane's belongings from her desk into a box and took the things that were property of the business. Since Jane was old school and had resisted inputting client information in the computer database, this also included a small box filled with index cards which had client phone numbers, addresses, credit card information, and other personal information noted on them. In the meantime, the other employee had arrived for work, and they all waited for Jane to show up. Jane arrived just before 9 o'clock, acting as though nothing had happened, and greeted everyone with a "good morning" as she walked through the door. However, she was apparently taken slightly aback when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend seated in the far corner of the office. At this point, Jane was midway to her desk when Sandy informed her that there was no need to go any further and that she had accepted Jane's notification of retirement. She then handed Jane a check compensating her for the hours she had worked in the current pay period, as well as 2 weeks' wages in lieu of Jane finishing out her final 2 weeks before her retirement. Jane was dumbfounded and went into panic mode. "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." Sandy responded that indeed she had retired, given her notice, and had proof of it in writing. All Jane could do was continue repeating, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire," while unsuccessfully attempting to get the support of the other employee, who refused to come to her defense. Sandy then pointed to the box containing Jane's belongings, wished her a happy retirement, and told her to leave the office. Jane quickly rifled through the box and noticed that the small box containing the index cards with client information was not there. She insisted that Sandy return it to her, which Sandy refused to do, explaining that it was property of the business, contained personal client information, and that she would be in violation of Canadian privacy laws if she were to let Jane take it. Jane's shock had now turned to obstinance, and she refused to leave without the box. Both the other employee and Sandy's boyfriend had started to get involved, repeatedly telling Jane to just leave. Sandy then informed Jane that if she didn't leave, they would have to call the RCMP, Canadian Police, at which point, Sandy's boyfriend dialed 911 to inform the dispatcher of a disgruntled former employee at XYZ travel agency who was refusing to leave the premises. Within a few minutes, 2 police officers arrived, and Jane immediately ran to the door ranting about being fired and about the missing box of client info. In order to de-escalate the situation, one police officer told Jane to come outside and explain to him her side of the story. The other officer remained in the office to hear Sandy's side of the story, agreeing that Jane was not legally entitled to the box of client info. The other officer then re-entered the business and told Jane to wait outside. He said that Jane was insisting that Sandy was holding on to her personal belongings, namely a box of important information. Both Sandy and the officer who had spoken to her explained the contents of the box to the other officer, who in turn agreed it was not Jane's property. The police officers then picked up the larger box of Jane's personal belongings, took it outside to Jane, and told her she needed to go home. To rub salt in Jane's wounds, the next day, Sandy put up a large sign in the window of the business congratulating Jane on her retirement, and even put a small announcement in the local newspaper doing the same thing. The icing on the piece of revenge cake was Sandy, when filling out the necessary government forms for when an employee quits/gets fired/retires, made sure to check the box labeled "retired" for the reason for Jane no longer being employed. By doing so, Jane was ineligible to collect unemployment insurance benefits. Stop wasting time and follow the job order. Quick one, but it's a textbook case. Yesterday I got an email from a customer who wanted an in-depth analysis of dish soap sales for the past 3 years. Easy peasy, it's all automated, but time consuming to extract that much data. As I was entering the details into the software according to the job order, I see customer specified product code A190. I check the database and oh, that's the code for scented candles. I think they meant A160 dish soap. Due to past shenanigans, we're supposed to follow job orders to the letter, and if there is a conflict, the product code trumps over whatever else the customer wrote. This is spelled out very clearly in our service agreement. However, if I suspect a mistake, I will give the customer a call so they can amend the job order and avoid wasting time and money. They are usually grateful for the heads up. So I call the customer and I barely manage to say I'm from company XYZ that this lady starts berating me about how long the job is taking. First off, I got the timestamped email less than 15 minutes ago, and this kind of report usually has a turnaround of 24 to 48 hours. Second, I am trying to help by pointing out the wrong product code. But this lady just will not let me talk, she keeps cutting me off and talking over me. When I finally manage to get 2 words in and say I wanted to confirm the product code, she tells me to stop wasting her time and just do what the job order says. Then she hangs up on me. You can probably guess how it went. I ran the request as written for product A190, candles, sent it yesterday by EOB. Lady flipped when she saw it. Apparently they needed this report for a meeting that now has to be rescheduled. My boss and her boss got involved. The end result is that customer's boss just sent me a request to please run a report for dish soap, A160, when convenient, and apologizing for the misunderstanding. My company will waive the cost of the extra report. I understand the lady was moved to a role that limits the amount of damage she can do. Already the fact that she ordered the report the literal day before the meeting was not great. Moral of the story: before telling someone to shut up, maybe listen to what they are saying. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.